agenda. And the first item on the agenda are public appearances. And so we are going to start. Just to remind everyone, you have 3 minutes, and ask that you hold your time to 3 minutes. The green light should be on at the microphones. And we will be starting with Ben Yeager, and Ben will be followed by Jamie.
Do you mind if I speak without the mics, or would you?
It actually is streamed. It's recorded for.
So should I sit then, or?
It'll just pick you up.
Okay.
They don't really. They're not mics. They're more recorders that
Yeah.
needs to get done.
Press which one?
It's already on.
Oh, this one right here. Okay.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Begin.
Yeah.
Dear members of the board, thank you very much for having us here this evening. My name is Ben Yeager, and I'm the band teacher at Madison Memorial High School. Congratulations on your work at East. We applaud your efforts in creating that great space for those students to perform. Mark Salzman reports that the students are excited. The staff climate has improved, which has led to more community engagement and has raised student achievement. We look forward to partnering with you to create these opportunities in the student learning spaces and performance space at Memorial High School. We are here with you today to request inclusion on a future referendum for a performing arts wing at Memorial that would create learning spaces and a performance space that are large enough, safe for students and families, and acoustically sound. Our art is made of sound. That's what we do. We create great art as a team. For our students to be college and career ready, they need access to learning spaces that have safe volume levels, space to not trip on things on the way to their lockers, silent and effective heating and cooling, windows to the outside world, and separation of sound. Current constraints at Memorial are not enough space, acoustics that need updating, and sound separation that is non-existent. These constraints limit how much we can personalize learning for students. A fine arts wing with medium ensembles room and equipment storage would enable us to implement gradual release of responsibility strategies to give students ownership over their own learning. We could truly personalize learning with space for small group and individual curriculum. In our field, what that looks like is students working on solos, collaborating with colleagues in small ensembles. We have volunteers from UW that come out and coach those small groups, and we pay clinicians that specialize in the instruments to work with the students. As we reach out to our community, the auditorium has become home to Jefferson, Toki, and Spring Harbor families as well. This new fine arts wing would have enough space to properly host the side-by-side learning experiences we have been providing for our younger colleagues. We also host many professional musicians. A couple months ago, we tried to fit the U.S. Navy Band on the stage with our students. It was a great concert, but it took a lot of time to fit everybody on there, and it was pretty crowded. We are really good at attracting world-class talent at Memorial High School. We just really need your help with the brick and mortar part, please. Our district constantly competes for families with other districts. We know that this new fine arts wing would be a real selling point for families that are looking at other cities. We want to keep people here in Madison and at Memorial. Thank you.
Okay. Jamie will be followed by Cameron Scarlett.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Pitt. I am one of 3 music teachers at Memorial High School, and I also serve as the department chair. In my 19 years of teaching at JMM, I have worked with many incredibly talented students, and I am here today in order to advocate for performing arts facilities that will improve the learning environment and subsequently increase student and staff morale as well as student achievement. As we look ahead to possible changes, there are many components that would enhance what we do on a day-to-day basis. One current challenge that we face is lack of accessibility for people with disabilities, both for the stage and in the classrooms. Stage access for people in wheelchairs is currently limited to one entrance via the custodial hallway, since there are steps at the stage door. The lack of adequate square footage in the classrooms results in overcrowding in the larger ensembles, often forcing us to position students in configurations that are not musically or pedagogically ideal. Improvements to the size and accessibility of the Performing Arts Wing would also benefit teachers and students in other ways, such as being able to roll large instruments, equipment, and risers instead of trying to hoist and carry them over the stairs. and for adequate space for the storage of instruments, music sets, and costumes. Another vision of ours is the creation of practice rooms and soundproofing all rooms throughout the wing. We strive to engage students in reflective lessons, and that practice hinges on being able to hear oneself or one's ensemble in order to assess progress and product. A new facility would also allow for small ensemble work and more efficient festivals, such as hosting solo and ensemble and large group contests. It is clear that the MMSD students already bring extraordinary talent, energy, and dedication, and it is our hope that we will be able to bring a performing arts facility up to a level that will support and enhance their high school experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Cameron, followed by Dan Laundis. Okay.
Hi, my name is Cameron Scarlett. I want to thank you for letting me take some time to offer a parent's perspective on the JMM performance space. My youngest son, Micah, is a freshman horn player with the Wind Ensemble. I think he's about the second freshman that's played with this group. He also plays in the Wiseau Philharmonic Orchestra. I think he's a terrific musician, but I may be a little biased. There are two main points that I want to make this evening. The first is that 67% of the growth in the MMSD area in the next 20 years is predicted to be in the in the Madison Memorial attendance area. The time to do this project is now. Let's get ahead of the curve so that when those kids show up, we're ready for them. The second point, as you've just heard Mr. Yeager and Mrs. Pitt tell you, is that they struggle in teaching in the space that they are allowed at James Madison Memorial. But the thing is that the Building Excellence report says that the JMM music facility is rated as a B and the auditorium is rated as a C. So there seems to be a discrepancy. But I think that the problem is that the Building Excellence report is really all about the physical space that's there. The paint on the walls is okay, the tiles aren't cracked and broken. But the space itself is just not optimal for the specialized kinds of teaching that go on in the music program and the performing arts at JMM. Let me tell you about my first experience in the JMM band room. Last December, we got a request from Mr. Nichols at Jefferson that there were some volunteers that were needed because Mr. Yeager had found some instrument lockers at a really good price, and he also managed to find a donor that was willing to pay for them. And they just needed some volunteers to move the lockers into the band room. I was really shocked when I saw the condition of that band room. It was not even as good as the band room that I had 40 years ago in a junior high school in Boise, Idaho. That district is very comparable to Madison in that at the time there were 3 high schools and 6 junior highs. And I should also let you know that this is the same band room that my dad was in 60 years ago when he was there at that same junior high. In that band room, we had a separate secure area for instrument storage. We also had 3 to 4 very nice high ceiling practice rooms for small ensembles that were isolated for the main rehearsal space. And the main rehearsal space was a large area that was terraced so that everybody had good vision, a good sight line to the conductor and could hear him easily. That's not what JMM has. But what JMM does have is they have dedicated and passionate faculty that we need to support and encourage by funding this new project. We also have really talented and enthusiastic students, and that need to be encouraged in their pursuit of college and career. But I'm not talking just about the kids that want to be the next Yo-Yo Ma, B.B. King, or Jodie Foster. I'm talking about kids like Micah's oldest brother, who's currently a nuclear engineering major at University of California, Berkeley on a Naval ROTC scholarship. For him to even be considered to get into Berkeley, he had to have 2 semesters of performing arts education. What we'd really like to have this evening would be to join with you so that we can build a performing arts wing that supports our community. We want to build facilities that maximize our students' abilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Dan, followed by Brian Nelson.
Hello, my name is Dan Lowndes. My daughter is an oboe player for the Memorial Band, and I'm here to speak also in favor of having a performing arts wing at Memorial. You know, there's an old joke that lawyers, they when the facts are in their favor, they argue facts. When the law is in their favor, they argue the law. When neither is in their favor, they just pound the table and argue about fairness. I'm lucky because all 3 of those are in my favor tonight. You look at the facts, you're going to hear from the students here tonight about the condition that they play in and what it could be like if they had a better wing, and what generations to come will have if we do adopt a better plan. Regarding law, if you look at your capital improvement plan, it talks about accessibility, which one of the teachers talked about, supporting excellence. In the performing arts wing, you look at, in addition to the band, the JMM forensics team has won state championship after state championship after state championship, going back, I think, 12 of the last 16 years. This would be supporting them. You look at expanding community use. We talked about that, how Memorial catchment area is growing. It would be nice to support not just that, but also the middle schools. And regarding just pounding the table in fairness, you know it's the right thing to do. If you would visit us and compare Memorial's current system with Middleton's Performing Arts Center or Verona's Performing Arts Center, talk about competition. There is no competition. They're far and away much better than we are, but our students are better. So we need facilities for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Brian Nelson, followed by Julia Mann.
Good evening. My name is Brian Nelson. I am a senior at Memorial High School. I'm playing in the wind ensemble. I have been since sophomore year. And even though I'm graduating after this year, I still care deeply about this, and I think that future music students should be able to have opportunities that I unfortunately have not had in high school because there hasn't been the space for it. So, more on space, the practice rooms that we currently have aren't really practice rooms. They're more storage closets. And the size is essentially, if you play an instrument bigger than the alto sax, they're not particularly useful. And if we had bigger practice rooms, I think that would encourage a lot more students to practice at school and afford students an opportunity and a place to practice and improve, and that would really strengthen our program, and it would help students grow and be better prepared for what they want to do, and it would help develop a work ethic and time management skills. There are also no mid-sized rehearsal rooms, so it's extremely difficult to do sectionals or small ensemble rehearsals. And if we had those things, we could do sectionals. I've been trying to get brass choir going, and that would be a perfect space for it if we had a smaller room. And other chamber ensembles. The rehearsal spaces, if we had bigger rehearsal spaces, then we could fit every single person in the room easily. We could fit all the percussion, we could fit all the equipment. There would be space, everyone would have personal space, and it would be easy to get in and out of the rooms. And as it stands, that's especially difficult to do in orchestra, it's difficult to do in band. And with the stage, Mr. Yeager touched on that when he said the U.S. Navy Band played with us, and it was difficult to get everyone on stage. And if we had a larger stage, we could fit the whole larger ensembles. We could do a full symphony orchestra. We could fit the U.S. Navy Band collaborations, and we'd have these opportunities to help our students grow and do side-by-sides. It would be fantastic. And we also would like a pit orchestra when we're considering the stage. Our current system is plywood and 2x4s, and it would be fantastic to have a pit orchestra and help students prepare if they go into that field. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia Mann, followed by Aristotle Oz.
I just wanted to start off by thanking you all for listening and hearing us out on this matter. It means a lot to know that you guys care about our arts department and everything in general. That's really pretty awesome. And my name is Julia Mann. I'm a junior at Memorial High School. I'm in the JMM Wind Ensemble. And because of this program, I've actually been able to learn so many different instruments, and that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today, is what this program has done for me and helped me grow as not only a musician, but as a person as well. And frankly, I think because of the amazing staff that we have and of our facility and opportunities that I've had here at Memorial, that's probably one of the reasons that I'm alive and look forward to being in there every day. That's part of my drive. As a program, I don't need to be up here to tell you that we've been accomplishing amazing things this year. We were part of the WMEA competition. We won that. We have an amazing flute player. We have amazing brass ensemble. We were on TV this year. We just deserve better equipment and all that, and better facilities for students to reach their maximum potential. Because a lot of students here are planning on pursuing careers in music outside of just high school. And other students just find themselves within the music and want to develop them as musicians and as people. And it's a great place for kids to meet each other and become friends, and then it's also a great place for kids to have great mentors such as Miss Pitt, Mr. Yeager, and our new orchestra teacher as well, which is why I think we deserve better equipment and better facility to help students grow and the band grow and the orchestra grow and the choir grow and all grow together. Thanks.
Thank you. Aristotle, followed by Erik Anderson.
Good evening. I would like to focus on the auditorium tonight. My name is Aristotle Oz, and I'm a student at James Madison Memorial who has participated in countless activities in our auditorium. This space is used for everything, from musicals to concerts, staff meetings to presentations. The vast variety of events requires an extremely flexible space. The auditorium, as it is, barely fits the standards held over 50 years ago when the school was built, and certainly does not accommodate our needs now. It is a strangely neglected room in a building where the creative, audio, and visual arts are supposed to be encouraged. First and foremost, our auditorium is missing the key aspect of an auditorium: uniform sound distribution. The ceiling lacks an acoustically hard material in order to reflect sound properly down upon audience members. Our seats are currently wooden and without padding. This is not only another acoustic flaw, but is extremely uncomfortable. My grandparents, all in their 80s and 90s, are unable to come see shows at Memorial due to this seating arrangement and the lack of wheelchair accessibility within the audience. In regards to the lighting arrangement, the catwalk is relatively unusable due to the fact that the ceiling hangs down and effectively blocks it. The only way to solve this issue currently is to lower the height of the lights, which only results in blinding most anyone using the stage. Despite this underperforming design, Memorial students have continued to showcase their talents and put on outstanding performances. The Tommy Awards, a regional musical theater awards program through the Overture Center, has honored several students over the years with awards for their talents. However, our sound and lighting design has not received the same recognition. Future Memorial students deserve an auditorium that lives up to their abilities. The lack of space our auditorium provides has been unable to uphold the true value of high school musical theater, which is to learn. Without the space to do workshops in areas such as wigs, makeup, costumes, design, and set construction, it has been a more learn-on-the-job experience. While this can be effective in some areas, for our purposes, it fails to include everyone and does not ensure that everyone is adhering to the same standards. Little of our current system applies to how modern theaters actually function, but working with a well-operating and more modern sound design, lighting design, and space will provide any actor, tech crew member, public speaker, rock star, choir, soprano, or tuba player with the resources they need to more effectively pursue their passions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erik Anderson, followed by Beth Strickland.
Hello, my name is Erik Anderson. I'm a resident of the Madison Metropolitan School District, and I'm also the band director and the music department chair at Verona High School. And I really wanted to come tonight to speak in support of the amazing students and faculty that you have at Madison Memorial and their quest for a new performing arts wing. I can speak from experience from my 12 years at Verona High School that our facilities in the Performing Arts Department have truly benefited student learning and community engagement in significant and meaningful ways. And I'm so fortunate to have been a part of that, and I would love to see that spread throughout Memorial, the Madison School District, and everywhere, so that we can truly have equity for all students in Dane County. As far as student learning is concerned, just like you wouldn't have an art class with a 140-watt light bulb or a varsity basketball game on a cement floor, sound reflects off of surfaces, and for our students to truly perform to the best of their ability, those have to be acoustically treated surfaces that support the production of great sound. In terms of personalized learning, as we move forward with that in education, as folks have talked about already, the spaces, the individual practice rooms for the brass choir, the flute ensemble, the percussion ensemble, all of those things are truly where music is going now and into the future. In terms of community engagement, I can speak from my experience in Verona, where our facility has supported the growth of many community arts organizations, a community band, a thriving community theater program that in turn have then significantly given back to our school community and have truly enhanced the things that we're able to do and the opportunities that we're able to provide to our students then in turn. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences with you, and I look forward to seeing the amazing things that the new Performing Arts Wing can bring to the students and the community of Memorial High School.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Beth Strickland.
Thank you. My name is Beth Strickland. I am the head of the JMM Band Boosters program. The Boosters respectfully request your consideration of the construction of a new performing arts wing at Memorial High School, adjacent to the field house, where we have the required space for the facility. It would be wonderful if we could do all of the high schools so that all students could have equitable access to good learning facilities. The construction of this facility would offer students the quality learning environment that they deserve, thereby assisting them to become college and career ready. It would increase their capacity for high achievement, enhance performance quality, boost both student and faculty morale, vastly improve the learning environment, and become a focal point for arts for the area, providing a center for cultural enrichment for the surrounding community, creating a positive impact that could span decades. We understand that this is a long-term project and are prepared to raise funds through the Foundation for Madison Public Schools, with whom we have set up an ABC account. We look forward to working with you and would be deeply appreciative if you could provide us with feedback delineating what you need from us to make this project a reality. Also, please, I would like, if you don't mind, the Memorial students who are here tonight to please stand. I'm really grateful to all of you for coming, and we're very proud of you and all of your achievements. The Memorial Band program, which is the program I'm familiar with, and I don't mean it to any detriment to the other programs, choir, orchestra, and theater, but I'm familiar with the band, has achieved this year. As Julia Mann stated, they were elected to perform at WMEA, one of 2 bands out of 2,000 across the state this year. Mr. Yeager, our outstanding band director, was inducted into Phi Beta Mu, a prestigious national fraternity that recognizes the outstanding music teachers. Our kids have consistently earned ones, which is the highest rating you can get, as well as exemplary soloist awards, some of them with their own personal compositions at solo and ensemble festivals. This year, 6 of our students went to the state honor band. One of them performed the complex solos at the concerts. JMM Bands consistently places first at large group festivals each year, and many of our students are members of the Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra. We are very proud of them and would like to support their endeavors by the construction of this facility. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so that ends public appearances, and next on our agenda is the we had on the agenda the motion to approve the minutes of September 18th, 2017. But since the board just received these, we're actually going to hold off on that until the next meeting to give more time for review. So the next item then is our long-range facilities plan. I'm going to frame this by saying that this really is a very high level, and that this is one of many, many meetings we will have. And so since we have other items on the agenda tonight, I will be making sure that discussion is fairly focused on the items that that the staff and the administration really want board feedback on as to whether those items, specific plans, are ones that we should move forward on, what board input is important in framing those and moving forward. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Mary. I won't say a whole lot so that we can get into the discussion, but I'm glad to see that there's a lot of enthusiasm about the topic of facilities in our district. And to all the people from Memorial here, as a violinist who felt at home in the music wing of my school, I can very much relate to what you all are saying, and look forward to seeing that discussion move forward. I am going to let Mike Berry and Andrew take it from here. We've got Chad as well, who's going to be chiming in. As Mary said, this is kind of a high level. What we're hoping to get out of this meeting is the board's blessing to go ahead and further vet these ideas with the public. So this is an important stop for us before we begin to flesh out a plan in even more detail. So, Mike, do you want to?
Jen, actually, since we have so many people who have come and spoken specifically on one particular issue, and from the preview of this, we aren't actually getting into specific that level of detail. You'll see that these are fairly large issues, but it does not mean that those issues won't be part of the long-range facilities plan, just not tonight's discussion.
Yeah, we're just not at that level of detail yet, so just know that. So don't be disappointed. We've got a road to go down. But we will be talking about the 4 high schools as part of our presentation today, which would be inclusive of the arts centers, of athletics facilities, and of course classrooms. So that is certainly on the table, and I'm excited about that possibility. All right, Mike, let's dive in.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. We should know better than to try to follow theater people.
I know.
Now we have to engage and present. You know, I don't know how we set this up, but we're going to have to raise our presentation game a little bit here. So building excellence is the name that we give our long-range facility planning effort, because long-range facility planning was being referred to as LRFP. And even though we're not marketing people, we know that LRFP is not going to get anyone's attention. So building excellence is what we call this larger effort. You guys have homework tonight?
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Mike.
Glad to hear that.
Mary, before you guys leave, could we get on our list of things to do, not just a review of Memorial Performing Arts Center, but La Follette and West as well, down the line? Just so, really appreciate you guys coming, and there's a lot of ways we can figure out how to review this. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. I'm a little surprised after the East upgrade that it took you so long to get here. But thanks for coming. Nothing any of you said is anyone here in disagreement with. So cool, thanks for coming, and keep up all the good stuff.
Thank you. Thanks again. Okay, so our Building Excellence core team is myself and Andrew and Chad, and also Beth Vade, who's out today, but Beth is the 4th member of our of our team. We have presented to the board 3 times previously. In the summer of 16, we had an enrollment report, the Vanderwall report. Vanderwall continues to be our sort of third-party associate and sort of a baseline data provider. In January of 17, that meeting ran long, so it was a very abbreviated building excellence update at that point. And then this past summer, July of 17, there was an in-depth look at capital maintenance planning. So, and an introduction to capital improvement planning. So we still use those 2 definitions: capital maintenance, meaning the upkeep and repair of the existing buildings, versus capital improvement, which is bigger, bolder, more strategic work. So tonight the idea is that we would focus on capital improvement. And the idea here is to air our thinking and our draft recommendations and check in with the board before engaging in public engagement process. So at the same time that we're doing this work, the City of Madison is doing their own 20-year long-range outlook. It's called Imagine Madison. And we want to make sure that we stay aligned with their work, that our recommendations make sense in light of what they're hearing and thinking about the future of the Madison community. On Friday, they posted a little update regarding the current online survey that they have, asking for community input. And the item they highlighted was this. It was K-5 elementary schools, more neighborhood focused, less time on bus. So there is going to be some connection, I think, between our work and the city's work, and I think that's the way it should be. And lastly, I think it's important to point out sort of a larger context here that we are planning in, which is really a kind of a thriving time for the city of Madison, for the regional economy. In terms of jobs, the city's talking about 40,000 additional rooftops over the next 20 to 30 years, strong tax base growth. The schools, of course, will benefit from that, just the tailwind of that, but the public schools also have an important part in making all of that happen, too. We have to be right there in terms of what this community expects and contributing to the quality of life in the community. So that's on us. So with those introductory comments, we'll dive in. This is just our sort of our goal statement, our mission statement, and this stands really to keep us grounded in the idea that school facilities are framework supporting work, strategic framework supporting work. It's not its own thing, right? And it needs to be sort of interwoven with the larger strategic vision. These are our design principles, and I have been told by our committee chair that some of my preliminary slides have the exact same effect as a tranquilizer dart. And so despite that...
He's paraphrasing. I never said that.
I think the exact quote was elephant tranquilizing dart. So let me...
it's not true. I don't even know where he comes up with this stuff.
You know it's true. Okay, so let me emphasize these design principles because everything that follows really starts here. First, let's write it down. We do not have online or even on paper right now a long-range facility plan, forward-looking 10 or 20-year plan. In fact, we had to go back and interview Mary Gilbranson, Art Rainwater, Mary Alpenalp, to pick up the threads from the last time that major work was done. I'm sorry, Alpenalp. Sue A is what we call her, so she's a Sue A to us. So writing it down and getting this to be a living document is really important to us and to whoever picks up this work at some point. Challenging the status quo. We're trying to look deeper than just enrollment hotspots. And we're really questioning all of the existing conditions. Identifying facility gaps. Sure, we have a lot to be proud of in terms of our existing structures, but where there are opportunities to improve, we feel obligated to name it and to own it and to make recommendations around it. Complex compound or compound complex means that we didn't want to bring either the board or the community a long list of individual projects that we thought of. All of this work is interrelated, and it's better that way, and hopefully you'll see that as we present. And lastly, planning versus doing. There's something about having 27,500 students show up every day that tends to shorten your planning horizon. It just does. But this work is 5, 7, 10-year planning, and in some cases 20-year planning. And we just need to understand that, you know, you can't pull a school building up in a year, right? Bring it up in a year. It takes a long time. So better to get started, I guess is the argument there. So with those design principles, thank you, Mary, we will move along. This is the "You Are Here" slide. We are at step 2. We are previewing our draft recommendations with the board, and then ultimately what we're seeking is permission to go forward and engage the community. It's a really important checkpoint for us. In terms of the larger process, 2017 was baseline fact gathering, facility assessments, Van der Waal. 18, we're thinking create and edit recommendations, narrow it down. 19, really develop some specific recommendations, meaning where, how much, pricing, tax impact. And then ideally put the district in a position where in 2020, which is a general election, presidential election, we'll be in a position to make some significant recommendations to the community. Yes?
Can you align that timeline with the 6 bullet points here a little bit clearer? That, you know, that the 2018, 2019, you know, is number 5 a 2019 or a 2020 thing?
Well, how does number 5 line up? Yeah, number 5, I think, would be the start of, we'd need to be at step 5, adopting initial recommendations early in 19, so that we could figure out exactly how to execute.
Okay. That helps, thanks.
Yeah. And then by January of 2020, we should be locked in for whatever it is we hope to do that year. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Next version, I think we'll add some dates. And this is our criteria. So hopefully the evidence of this will come through in our recommendations. But Beth Vade from our team led the public engagement effort around, around building excellence about a year ago, conducted a number of public input sessions, and came away with these criteria. And then we've, of course, used these as our inspiration for what we're going to recommend. At your place, board members, are a map that looks like this one. This is just a map of the school district by elementary attendance zone. And we have some extras here, I think. If anybody would like to take advantage. That map is one of 2 that you have in front of you, board members. The other is the map that shows our school district relative to the other Dane County school districts. Okay. So in the process of this, I learned that there is a state office of cartography. Didn't know that. There's actually a state cartographer. Science Hall at UW. This second map is the Dane County map. It's very hard to read on the screen, so the point is that Madison Metropolitan is in the center here, and as you can imagine, Monona Grove, McFarland, Oregon, Verona, Middleton, Cross Plains, etc., are the surrounding districts. You might or might not know that the geographic footprint of the school district is not the same as the geographic footprint of the city of Madison. There are areas where the city of Madison is parts of the city that are not in the school district, and there are parts of the school district that are not in the city. As a general rule, we think that the boundaries of the school district and the city should move together, unless there is some really compelling reason otherwise. but that is not the current condition. You'll see some instances in this presentation where that becomes relevant, and Andrew, I think, will point those out in just a few more slides. So for the focus of this presentation, we're looking at a window here of hopefully about 45 minutes, depending on board conversation. We're going to take the south and east sides recommendations and then pause. We'll do the north and west and pause. And then the high school and alternatives strategy will wrap it up. The time to get through the elementary middle school is a little longer than the high school, but it doesn't mean it's more important. And it's not going first because it's more important. It just presents better that way. So hopefully that there's no message in the order here, okay? All right. Andrew, are you ready to get us started?
Thank you.
Let's do it.
So the first area we're going to start on is in the south. We thought it would be easiest to take the Van de Waal map, the 20-year projections, and break them into 4 quadrants. It just helps us focus our attention, given all the school buildings that we have and attendance areas that we have, and then focus in on some of the development possibilities within each of those, and then use those kind of containers as a convenient theme for a narrative. So what I hope to convey tonight is an identification of issues facing the 4 elementary kind of quadrants that we have laid out here, and then describe a narrative that we think threads a lot of the solutions together, so you have an idea of what happens first, what happens second. So that's how we've situated this. The area that we have up on screen now for the south area, I'll remind you that the colors are intensity of residential development as well as the timing. So we see some residential development within our boundaries. There is a dynamic on the south side where we do have some additional residential development just to the east of the southern unit of Leopold, just across our border. Now, the planning issues that we see in the southern area, first is the size and complexity of Leopold. One of our largest, our second largest elementary. It's got 4K. It's a sprawling footprint. If you're not familiar with the building, it is very, very spread out. Also, the southern attendance zone for Alice is located in this area. And it is about 60% of those students that attend Alice live in this attendance area, this southern unit of Alice, but travel 5.5 miles away. So we've identified a lack of a neighborhood school for that area as a concern. Also, the Leopold area does have a lot of open enrollment leavers, and this is because we've got proximity to a couple of other districts right in that area, so about 100 students every year leaving the Leopold area. So I just wanted to take a second to better illustrate the 3 Alice attendance areas. Right now we're focusing on what's labeled here as South area. When we move to the east, then we'll be talking about the main area and east area of Alice, but right now we're talking about the southern area here. So draft recommendations we have, looking at that issue of a lack of a neighborhood school in that southern unit of Alice, given the length of bus rides, given the concentration of students there, draft recommendation here is to build a school in or near that area south of the Beltline to serve those students, as well as possibly a portion of Leopold's attendance area. Another thing that we do want to do is ask other school districts, namely Verona, Oregon, and McFarland, to come together to talk about the borders that we share and ensure that we're serving all of our communities as best we can, given our boundaries. So that's a theme that you'll see throughout. I think each of the areas that we're talking about for the elementary, those 4 areas, each includes a thread about talking to neighboring districts. And we're here to test the willingness of the board to let us go out and have those conversations.
Are we pausing now? Or are we going
like
then to the
If it's all right, I'd like to do east because the Alice solution hangs together, crosses the boundary, so I think that works well. So looking again at the 20-year projections from our Van de Waal issued report, you do see quite a few dark spots on here, and those bright colors, those darker colors indicate a lot of residential development that's possible, particularly the north central area of what's currently the Kennedy attendance area. I'd also like to point out some areas to the south. So roughly, if you took that the little block in the bottom that stands out by itself, that's a Glendale attendance area. The area that's immediately around that and going roughly straight up to the Elvium attendance area is a neighborhood development plan that the city's putting forward called Yahara Hills. So there are development opportunities out there, and we'll get to that as part of a recommendation. I just wanted to point it out here while we had the map in front of us.
There's a pointer on your...
If you trust me to use a pointer, I can try that. There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. So this is the Glendale attendance area I referenced. The Yahara Hills development is roughly around that and then straight up through here. So that's the general area we're talking about.
Nicely done.
Something new every day. Okay. So reviewing key issues that we see in the east, back to that large development possibility, that residential development, we do see a lot of students coming into the Kennedy and the Elvium attendance area in, say, 10 years. Also, the Kennedy and Elvium areas are divided by I-90, so as we're looking at community identity, that's definitely a physical barrier to that community. Also in Nuestro Mundo, which is in the east area, and if you went back to our earlier map, you'd see it sitting in a facility outside of our attendance areas. So that is the least facility for Monona Grove, so that was an issue that we had identified as less than a permanent solution and less than an ideal location. Also, going back to that southern section, talking about a solution for that southern attendance area of Alice, if a new building did go in there to serve that neighborhood, then we would leave only 80 students behind in those two other areas, immediately around Alice and just to the east of it. And then the description I have up here of Yahara Hills, we highlighted as largely McFarland. There's also some Monona Grove properties in that planned area. So just to illustrate the Kennedy and Elvium areas, so this is the area that you'll see showing up on your Van de Waal map as being large development potential still to happen, residential development. And then highlighting then I-90, 94 as that heads south. And then this is 94 to Milwaukee. So that area then does have a lot of development possibility, and you can see here that these attendance areas are separated from the schools they attend. So this is roughly the Kennedy area, this is roughly the Elvium, split by 90. So this is just a highlight of the Alice area. So again, looking at about 80 students from those two areas immediately around Alice and then to the east. So then the draft recommendations. We do own a property on Sprecher Road, which I want to point out is right here. It's that orange block right in the middle of the kind of split between the Kennedy and Elvium attendance areas east of the interstate. And that's a property we've had for some time, and it is available for development. Looking at some of the development pressures we have in that northern section of Kennedy especially, we're thinking it's the time to get moving on a Sprecher Road elementary school site. Now, there are times that you want to make some moves and want to make some changes, and you need to make some room to move in. So this is an example of that. So opening a school at Sprecher Road would then allow us to shift Kennedy and Elvium attendance areas to a new school, if that plays out. We could then figure out a solution for the 80 or so students currently in the Alice area, and perhaps they would go to Elvium or any other possible outcomes. The new school on Sprecher, Schenck, Glendale, you name it. So there are a number of possibilities, as well as going to the new location south of the Beltline. But opening up the building of Alice and building a new Alice south of the Beltline then enables us to move Nuestro Mundo into a district-owned space that would be bigger, better, and offer that school some breathing room. So you can kind of see how some of these dominoes have to come into play. So a site on Sprecher, a site on Alice allows you to move some Alice and allows you then to settle an issue for Nuestro Mundo, so they kind of chain together. And then you continue to see the theme on here of inviting McFarland to talk about the Yahara Hills area. And this is the part where I'll pause, and then just let me know if we need to go back and forth to maps or I'll make other references.
Nikki?
I had been reading recently about our issue with Glacier Hills and the boundaries and how certain kids from on the, I believe it's McKenna Boulevard in that area and Glacier Hills neighborhood are not in our district and have to bus in. My question is how do we avoid that from happening again?
Yeah. So when we talk about the border conversations with other districts, that's exactly what we are talking about. And I think it's a two-part solution. One is while residential development hasn't occurred, you might remember we referred to that as greenfield development, so new houses on what's currently ag land, for example. Mm-hmm. So just having the conversation with neighboring districts, when that building starts, when the buildings start to go up, typically that's the point where it would move from one municipality to another. Could we not also have a move from one school district to another? So there are cases where it's brand new construction, and that's one example. And I'd also cite that existing development could be discussed as well. It only becomes more complicated in my mind in that you have to then have very good agreements with other districts about how long a student could go there if they wanted to stay with that school district and not change. But it's really transitionary issues that you'd have to work around. Definitely adds to some complications, but it's certainly not off the table when approaching another district. And to highlight when districts make agreements to change borders, they're mutually agreeable. So a lot is open to negotiation in terms of new development and existing.
Teacher?
Got one big question that's kind of overarching for all these, and then some particular ones on these proposals here. The big question is that the Van der Waal projections, the 5-year projections, are much, much different than our current 5-year projections. And trying to understand how to reconcile that, because if the 5-year project, the 10 years are based on the 5 years, and the 15 years are based on the 10 years, and the projections are just, they're radically different than our most recent 5-year projections. That's so right. I guess, how is your team reconciling that, and what advice would you give the board for that? Sure.
Yeah, the important thing to keep in mind is that one report, the internally generated enrollment reports, is a 5-year process. We have a methodology that looks at past performance of our schools and then tries to take some account of new development. But given the number of students we have and given some needs to be conservative on those projections in terms of new students coming in, we have our way of running those calculations. And that is strictly for 5 years, and it's based on building by building experience. The report that Van der Waal prepared for us is 20 years worth of projections, so a very, very different timeline. The first reason why it would be different is again that methodology. So this is looking at likely development and timing of likely development and density of likely development based on Van der Waal's understanding of development patterns and landowner interests, the economy, transportation changes, those kinds of things. So very, very much more built on local knowledge than a formula. The second reason why it would change is the Van der Waal report's now about 1.5 years old. So over, call it 2 years of work, a lot has changed. And as Mike mentioned, we have a very vibrant economy, a very vibrant community. And a lot of what we're seeing in terms of projections are actually coming through with greater density and faster timelines than originally contemplated. And it is part of the Van der Waal model for us to consider updates frequently, and we just need to figure out how frequently. Is that every 3 years or every 5? And refresh then based on reality. So the short difference why the two don't match up entirely is methodology and just time, greater knowledge of actuals that have happened. So in terms of use, because we're dealing with long-term facilities development, having a long-term picture of the enrollment obviously helps us out with that. Recognizing full well that we have a good understanding, a really solid understanding of what's happening this year, pretty good of what's next, 5 years out a little bit guessier, and even more so once you're talking 20 out. So a lot of the future timelines are really flexible in that regard. And we're always going to be looking at the most recent and current information, not just in terms of actuals, but then just the projections just on the horizon to help make decisions.
Okay. I guess that, that if we're going to be asking the voters for tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a short-term ask as well as a long-term ask, and reconciliation around this is going to be important. Some specific questions is that, well, actually, this is just a statement, and some questions that go from it is that, I see that, if we were to build a Sprecher Rd school, we'd be pulling about 300 students out of Elvium and Kennedy, and those are and they would be borderline viable schools at that point. And so, and I guess the statement here is that as we consider this, I think that, and not that I would not support them, but I think that school closures and repurposing, the Alice is on there as a repurposing, but more generally have to be part of all of these, east side, west side, north side, south side. I just think that when we have this much excess capacity by anyone's calculations, that without, if we're asking again for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, that there has to be some assessment of our excess capacity and our efficiency here. And so I don't know what Elvium and Kennedy would look like if we pulled 300 students out of them. But my guess is that they wouldn't look that at least one of them would not look terribly viable, even with 80 new students from Alice. So
yeah. So you can go first. I'll add.
Sure. If I may, I think that we need to be careful with Kennedy and Elvium, in that we have a couple of sort of X factors. One, there's the Alice group of kids who would need to potentially attend one of those schools, or at least have that opportunity. Secondly, there's the Yahara Hills X factor in all of this. Thirdly, we do not have any assets east of 90, and we suspect that the very presence of a school will accelerate what has been sort of a very slow-moving residential development, other than the initial Door Creek area. Watching it, yes. Not ready to say that those two schools are borderline non-viable.
I mean, that was general, that with a lot of the changes north, south, east, west, that there are places where that comes. This is the first place where it seemed appropriate. The other question, one more question, which is, Glendale has as crazy attendance area as Alice. Why is Glendale not in the mix here?
Yeah, I think the Yahara Hills development could be part of a solution for Glendale in terms of borders. Also, talking to neighboring districts about attendance areas. I mean, we're certainly willing to have those conversations, and at times those conversations will go both ways. It's just our intent here today is to explain kind of where we think the greatest opportunities lie, and expressing our willingness to have those conversations if the board's willing to let us have those conversations. But I also just want to highlight one last thing, what Mike said, but also the purpose of us putting these ideas together is to just chain together a likely scenario or a possible scenario. So a great deal of work would ever be done around boundary changes with or without a brand new building. So it's just our intent here to show just what's possible and to convey this idea of stringing solutions together to help with timing. I was going to say the same
thing. I think it goes back to the compound complex idea that Mike presented at the beginning, that I think the Alice challenge and possible solution came into the picture as we were looking at the Leopold challenge, right? Like in trying to think about different solutions to relieve Leopold. Then we started to string together challenges and solutions that could support one another. So that's the real rationale there. Yeah.
Okay. So just to, I guess, comment on the southeast commentary here. I think it's an interesting possibility to explore. I would be very interested in community feedback, first and foremost. I mean, I think boundary discussions are always really, they can be very emotional, and so this one, I would very much be interested in understanding what all of the affected communities, what their perspective is. I do think we need to find ways to think through bringing the Nuestro site internal, or at the very least creating some flexibility around, I mean, look, we had another conversation this year about Montessori, right, which is essentially an alternative elementary program. So I guess I'd be curious a little bit how you're thinking around other alternative elementary programs might play into creating additional capacity. If we're going to build a school, it creates some options, right? So I would be curious in how, I think we heard a lot of support for the idea of Montessori. We talked about bringing it in-house some way. Again, I think something to explore if we're going to be creating capacity. In general, I think small schools are really challenging. They're really challenging from an allocation perspective. We're going to talk about class size later, and we have a lot of very small rooms that are challenging to manage from an allocation perspective, and we could create our upper end. We could create a lot more capacity on the upper end if we didn't have so many small rooms. So just in general, I think it might be helpful through this to have like a lower bound of what's the smallest K-5 school we would want, and keep that in mind through the process, just as a guiding. If we go under this for this number of grades, we know we may be challenged from a staffing perspective moving forward. So that would just be a helpful number to get your take on. I think, in general, on the boundary discussions, there's a lot of boundary discussions. Do you guys want to comment on that? Or?
Mike was distracting me at the moment, so I'm sorry I had to ask you to repeat the question. He was whispering something I didn't understand, and then I didn't understand you. It was very unsuccessful multitasking. I'm sorry.
Terrible at multitasking.
That was good. You did two things wrong at the same time. I think that, and you know, maybe the public engagement will stretch our thinking, but you'll see us begin to contemplate elementary alternatives and elementary. We called it innovation and elementary experimentation when you get to the north section of the school district, because that's where the capacity seems to lie. And hopefully we can touch on it when we get there, which will be just a couple of slides.
Okay, so let's move.
Comment on the boundaries.
Yeah.
There's, from my read of this, we're opening boundary discussions with almost every district around MMSD, which feels like potentially a push. My guidance would just be to pick a couple that might be higher leverage. They're obviously very challenging as well. So just
Jim.
Yeah, just real quick. I'm glad to see you highlighted relocating Nuestro Mundo to something we own, and as kind of like a general overall comment, I'd like to see us stop renting facilities wherever they are and put and have programming done in buildings that we own. So I'd like to see that folded in here in some way, including Badger Rock, which was set up specifically for what they do there. I'd like to see us negotiate with them some other option there where it's perhaps an ownership partnership. And any other place that we rent through all the alternatives and other things, I think those are, we've got cost savings that are clear, but just as a general rule to go forward, let's try to stop leasing places. And it's also been my experience is once something happens in a development, once the first one gets built, then it goes quick. And also, you're absolutely right that it never stays the same as the original plan. It always changes, and depending on lots of it depends on density is brought in there too. There's competing forces on increasing density and then to balance out by having open spaces. I get all that, but it's all it's a fluid thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to make a comment on one
On
of
that,
those
sure,
questions. Is
go
that
ahead.
all right? We can certainly get you that kind of optimum number for the elementary level, like what don't you want to go below. But I'll just say from experience, having elementary schools where you get to a point where you have only one teacher per grade level, or sometimes a little lower than that, that's when it becomes, I think, no longer viable. I mean, you really want to have at least 2 teachers at every grade level. You've got someone to team with, right? You can do flexible grouping. It becomes really difficult when you get smaller than that. So I think that's fairly easy to come up with. But I would just point out, before we go on to the next section, that we're trying to tackle some long-standing issues here. I mean, I hope it maybe goes without saying. These are issues that have come back to us repeatedly. The issue of Leopold beyond the other extreme, too big to support the staff and students as well as we would like. And in one of our, I think it is the top open enrollment leaver school. So I mean, it is. We've got to come up with a solution for the Leopold area. And Alice, who we've heard people come to these public meetings on several occasions looking for a solution to serve the students and families of Alice better. So I love the idea personally that we've strung together several kind of long-standing issues to come up with a possible solution that'll address all of them.
It's actually,
So, Jen,
it's actually closer from here to Alice than it is from Badger Rock to Alice.
Right.
So you can imagine how much that's not a neighborhood school in any way for the Alice South community.
Yeah. So I see the logic behind the east because of Nuestro because of the growth in that area with Kennedy and Elvium. I think TJ brings up a really good point. We want to make sure about these, or at least have a really good analysis and understand those growths. So there is a possibility of additional, fairly high probability of additional students coming in there. I'm much less convinced, and I do like the Alice move. Last week I visited at Crestwood. The thought that Ally kids are being bused that far, really not accessible for their parents to come in. Small kids being going that far those are some of the concerns. Jen, to your point of Leopold, I like doing something in the South, but I'm not feeling this is. I don't think that what you're talking about here will actually address the open enrollment leavers. I remember it was 6 years ago when I was first running for school board and I was doing doors and the Fitchburg area, the more southern Fitchburg area. And I remember I knocked on the door. Young father came to the door with 2 kids, in his arms, and I said I was running for school board and would appreciate his support. And he says, well, can you change what district we're in? And that was his, and we are losing. And, every parent wants to feel comfortable that where they are sending their kids, they're getting the best education. So I look and I say, we have schools. I think Badger Rock, it's only been a year where we were considering as a board not renewing that charter. To me, the fact that that's not a neighborhood school and we're considering putting up another school in that area to have it, to me sounds like I'd much rather be looking at going more southern in the Leopold attendance areas, be still able to address the Alice issue. I think we have to pull Badger Rock into the mix because overall you're not seeing a whole lot of growth. So here we're going to spend and go for a referendum for a significant amount of money to build a new school with basically no additional students other than pulling the Alice in. However, if you felt you had a good share of pulling in the people we're losing through open enrollment, then in fact you are. But I don't think the plan of putting it up near the Beltline is actually going to address your open enrollment issues. TJ?
I want to echo what Mary said about the Leopold open enrollment issues, and I think that there's a general sense here also that that you know, Leopold is too big, and we own a building that's too big already. Some people at on the Leopold site have talked about, you know, 2 schools in 1 building kind of idea as something to at least have a smaller community there and things like that. I think also that if we were to build something south or do something like that, that again, repurposing that for, you know, be it a district professional development place, be it something else, but, you know, I really hate to see space go empty when we own it already. The place where I disagree a little bit with Barry is that both the Alice and the Glendale south of the Beltline stuff, to me, is troubling. I mean, because it is not a neighborhood school, and not, you know, at this point, it's hard to say that, you know, I would really definitely support that, but I would like to see options, and you know, we have the Alice option there. I would like to see the Glendale south of the Beltline mixed into that option a little bit too. And all of this reminds me also that as these develop, and I'm sure that this is already part of the plan, the projected demographics of various arrangements would be would have to be part of the considerations.
Okay, so then we'll move on to the west.
All right. So the west, you'll note, is a pretty big geography with some interesting things going on. So there's, first of all, a lot of color on here, which indicates we have a lot of residential development possibilities. So one area that I know that we've talked about in the past is this area north of Olson Elementary, and then also some of these other areas that come filling into some areas that have yet to be developed on the far west side. Also, the border issues, as Nikki had indicated, we do have students that live in this area, but then bus all the way out to Monona Grove schools, or I'm sorry, Middleton schools, Middleton Cross Plains. Yeah, and then also we have the city boundaries actually come up to this point, though that does not belong to Madison schools. So a few different dynamics going on over here. Long term, all of that development over there will yield about 1,100 students in the Memorial feeder pattern. That's our biggest growth area for the foreseeable future. Also, Allied, we have about 200 elementary students that live on Allied, and as Mary mentioned earlier, being bused largely to Crestwood and many to Stevens. Definitely not a local school or a neighborhood school for those students. And then the borders that I just described for Verona and for Cross Plains. To just give us the geography for Allied, is the small finger green on this map. It is contiguous boundaries with the city, so both the city of Madison and Madison schools boundaries are this little finger of Allied Drive that comes into city of Fitchburg and Verona School District. So the recommendations we have here, building a new elementary in the Allied area with a broader attendance area, either a magnet or after talking to a neighboring school district, perhaps expanding boundaries that we have south so they get a little bit more rational than just this little finger of Allied coming down. And then seeing what that attendance area would look like and getting an idea of what a magnet school would look like drawing in from around the district. So that's our current thinking on the Allied community school. And then for those developments in the far west side, purchase land soon for an elementary. 7 to 10 is soon in these kinds of planning timelines, and keeping an eye out for middle school development as well, 10 to 15 years, looking at impacts on Toki and Jefferson in particular. Take a quick tour of the north side. We do have very few residential development opportunities in the area, but there are some interesting opportunities in the area, development aside. So first of all, there is that patchwork boundary. Does that make sense? Some of this is either existing development or new development that's kind of patched in between us and other districts. Also, we have, we're kind of on the same page in terms of some facility needs, non-school facility needs. So north area, we do have smaller elementaries in that area. Lindbergh continues to be light in enrollment. We can also take a look at the pairing of schools, Marquette and Lapham in this area, for example. Is that the same arrangement we want to have after all of this time? So checking in on that status of pairing. And then looking at the Northeast Neighborhoods development. So this is currently Sun Prairie School District, and for orientation purposes, roughly this area through here. It's northeast, so we could have attributed it north or east, so it's here. But that area is currently Sun Prairie Schools, and then an interest in having conversations with the Sun Prairie School District about border changes for that area. Draft recommendations, there is the opportunity to explore some elementary models. So, for example, could Lindbergh be a K-8? Would we want to do a full day 4K, a 4K center, or an early childhood center in that area? So there are some opportunities there with smaller schools. And looking at the potential presence of the district on the north side, we had a mention of a professional development center, an MCR hub. So there are some opportunities, we believe, on the north side where we could have that presence, and then lean out some of the staff that we have in Doyle and Hoyt. And are there then longer-term solutions for Doyle or Hoyt? Could they be schools? Could they be something else? And then the conversation with Sun Prairie. So I believe this is the part where I will pause before handing it over to Mike for the conversation on high schools and alternatives, but let's pause on west and north.
Anna?
So I do appreciate looking at building a neighborhood school in the allied neighborhood. I mean, I do think especially the younger kids being bused to 3 different school districts, 5 different schools, really has a negative impact on that neighborhood and community. In discussing the pairings, you brought up Lapham. Had we ever gone back to the discussion around our west side pairings? Like, is that a long-term thing? In particular, Franklin Randall. I feel like the Franklin neighborhood, there's been quite a bit of gentrification in there, and I know originally it was to kind of create more diversity, but we're seeing less diversity within those schools, and it's quite expensive to be busing kids across.
Yeah, I expected pairing to be a discussion of the 3 pairs. Not just the Lapham-Marquette pairing. The reason why Lapham-Marquette is called out here is that it plays into conversations around alternatives, given the top floor of Lapham used for alternative programming. So it's highlighted here for that reason, but I would expect us to look at all 6 schools, all 3 pairs, and just check in and see if the reasons to pulling them together are still the reasons to keep them together. Definitely.
Teacher?
A couple of things. Number one is 4K reminded me that throughout this process and in our projections and this, that a consistent flagging of how we're counting 4K and how we're dealing with 4K and very transparent around that, because we have, different documents treat 4K differently, and I think that when we're talking about capacity, even just half-day 4K, which is, assuming what we're doing now, having this in the capacities, having this when we talk about X number of elementary students, whether 4K is included or not, just flagging that is really important, because there's thousands of students. Second thing is that on 4K, though I'm not opposed to a full day 4K experiment someplace or pilot or whatever we want to call it, I would really prefer that a proposal come for at least one of those in each of the high school attendance areas. I don't think it is. I don't think it would be a good thing for our district to do that in only a single attendance area. Ideally, I think we do it in every middle school attendance area, but I understand that to me, at least one per high school attendance area is a compromise. I mean, I just don't. I'm not comfortable with that. Other way. The other, on the K-8 proposal, we have a lot of excess capacity in our middle schools in the East attendance area also. So to me, it seems like, you know, that's kind of like robbing Peter, who's already broke, to pay Paul, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. That doesn't seem to be a solution to excess capacity, just moving kids from a middle school into an under-enrolled school, and Marquette and Lindbergh are dangerously under-enrolled. I mean, dangerously. So just finally, on the Allied, directly on the Allied, number one is that if we can get cooperation with other districts and pull in new students, I think that there's a viable solution there. Otherwise, I look at things like Orchard Ridge, where we're well under capacity, and our projections show it remaining under capacity, which is actually proximate to Allied Drive in ways that Crestwood and Stephen are not, and that solutions go from that. And I also think that this is a place where the dominoes might have to fall so that Franklin Randall and Lincoln and West area schools are part of the mix, and you know, I know that we try to keep the lines between Memorial and between the high school attendance areas in Violet, but I think that, you know, with Thoreau in the mix and Lincoln, and I think that there's a lot of I think that to use efficient use of capacity would require looking at both West area and Memorial schools, and again, Orchard Ridge looks looks not dangerously under-enrolled, but certainly there's a hell of a lot of capacity there, and it is much closer than to Allied. I mean, it's the closest school as far as I can tell.
Yeah, we did a number of Toki Orchard Ridge analyses relative to Allied, and the thing is, they're all on the other side of Verona Road. Yep. So our thinking was, if you're going to solve Allied, and put it on the Allied side of Verona Road. And if that doesn't hold, and we end up with a Toki Orchard Ridge solution for Allied, okay. But we wanted to lead with this solution and see kind of how it evolves.
I think if we could pull it, if we could do the boundaries with Verona, that would be a real possibility. Otherwise, I'm looking at a school that's 200 or 2, and really building a school that's in the 200, 250 range, maybe maybe out at 300 is.
Understood.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one,
the
right?
The attendance area is key for that discussion. Yeah, and that attendance area issue seems to make sense. So, you know, we're optimistic that we can develop something around that idea, but to be determined.
Are you wanting to speak?
I was going to.
Okay, you need to like, give me a sign. I can't like read the face language. Go ahead.
So just to kind of, so I would agree with TJ's points on kind of Allied. It seems like that one is really dependent on attendance area or creating more students in some way, shape, or form. The north side, I'm really supportive of full day 4K. I'd like to explore that in more than one location if we can, but certainly in at least one or two. I would even push it to 3K if we wanted to play with that idea. So I think that is an exciting thing for families in our district. The Lindbergh piece, so K8, I mean, Lindbergh I think has one section of K this year, maybe two, but I don't know, Kelly, you probably know. But, adding more grades doesn't solve the allocations issue, right? It's still a set of very small grades. I would just challenge us to think through how we can address that, whether that's paired schools in the north side or multi-age classrooms, right? Or instructional design that's based on multi-age like Montessori. There's other solutions there that also create some cost savings and more optimal class sizes. So that just was a comment there. The middle school commentary, I mean, middle school was a little bit absent from this presentation, I have to say, for me.
It was for me too.
Which, given some of the challenges we're seeing in middle school, was just a bit of a surprise. I would love to kind of hear your best thinking at some point on how facilities can enable middle school to be a better experience. Because I'd be delighted. John, you may want to jump in on this, but I'd be happy to comment on that because we're aware of that. Except for a few references, there's not a strong middle school presence on these slides, and I think it's because basically of two things. Our middle schools tend to be rather small overall.
And so we were not seeing an immediate sort of enrollment-driven rationale for addressing, let's say, additional middle schools. We think that there is, however, an enormous lift on middle school renovations, basically CMP, capital maintenance planning, to improve the learning conditions and learning environment. So when we look at a Senate, for example, a Jefferson, Toki, these are major issues for us. We were going to address them more through maintenance of an existing facility rather than something kind of rearranging the pieces on the chessboard. Jen, did I leave anything out of that, or any other comment around it? No?
No, it was absolutely
Yeah.
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 Knowing that it's would be high on the list of the CMP projects.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might just push the thinking a little bit. It's not just this is not just a numbers game, right? The numbers game creates cost or savings depending on how we play it, and growth will certainly drive some action here on the boundaries, right? In all worlds, but facilities also create the caliber of the experience that kids have in our schools, and if families want to show up. And middle school is a time where students start to develop really independent kind of pursuits and loves, and I mean, performing arts is a great kind of asset that we just heard about tonight, right? I could imagine a performing arts magnet middle school, right? I just might push the thinking on what we could do with creatively thinking about space, especially if we had some, I mean, in a lot of the worlds that we're talking about, some dominoes fall and there's an asset somewhere in play. What if we thought about literally the instruction differently in that building and what you could do instead of just kind of making sure the toilets work and the pipes work and that kind of thing? So just to throw that over the fence on middle school, what would like a magnet middle school look like, right?
Very good. Yeah, we're totally open to that, and we define capital maintenance planning pretty broadly. I mean, if you could transform an existing school under capital maintenance planning by our values. So it's way too early for us to exclude any thinking.
It was
and
just
I just want to make sure you know
here.
that we're open to it.
So.
Okay.
But I will just, if I could chime in real quickly, I think, Kate, you're thinking about this isn't just about numbers, it's opportunities for innovation, for, thinking creatively about how to make our schools thriving places. I mean, that's what we're ultimately after.
And if we're putting out ideas like that do affect facilities, and especially if we talk about new schools, I would love to see that at least we think about a year-round school too as an option. That's another.
I think that's a good point. But I think getting back to the Allied Drive strategy, I mean, if that were a really exciting magnet option, right? I mean, it's about investing in a community that needs to be invested in, and making it attractive enough that it would pull additional enrollment in. I mean, that's the exciting opportunity there.
Okay, so I know we need to move on.
Okay. The second half of this presentation has to do with our high schools. Thank you, Andrew. These basic facts on the high school should be no surprise. Although that first statistic might sort of kind of caught our eye. 2.67% of all Wisconsin high school students attend one of these 4 schools. East, of course, 1922, La Follette 63, Memorial 66, that's our new one. And West 1930, you can see the years of service. This is one where it does not pay to average the years of service. You really have to see it broken out like that. Enrollments, you should probably be familiar with those already. The 20-year projection shows only Memorial as having a significant projected enrollment increase, and that is due to the amount of greenfield development yet to occur on the far west side. Certainly just the age of school for East and West would point to, it shouldn't surprise anybody that we'd be on, we poised for a major reinvestment there. The conditions at La Follette and Memorial, although they are newer, they were built in that sort of 1960s construction standards, which in some ways pose challenges just as great as, if not greater than, the older schools. So deferred maintenance is an issue at all four of these high schools. Yeah, I think that's the point. There's been no major comprehensive investment at the four high schools since maybe the 1970s, when they were adjusting to baby boomers reaching high school ages at that time. There's been one-off projects. There's the East Theater. There's the West HVAC project. There's been tennis courts and libraries, and yes. But there's been no really a broad-based, comprehensive look at the high schools, and it's too important to leave off of our planning. In addition to the high schools, the alternative school sites. Capitol High East is at Lapham on the 3rd floor, as you know. Capitol High West is in essentially kind of a strip mall environment across the street from Memorial High School. They used to be in the shoe company building, the big brown high-rise. I'm sorry?
Famous Footwear.
Yeah, Famous Footwear. So now they're near that, but it's a different building. Other alternative programs like Restore, Next Stop, Neon are located across from the Coliseum or the Alliant Energy Center on Olin Avenue. We have other alternatives. We have SAPARs at Marquette, for example. There's programs in multiple locations across the city. I wish that we could tell you this was by design. It's not. It is a series of improvisational moves. And this last bullet, I think, is really the key concept, which is that high-quality sites for this purpose are not easily found. There's a very certain set of requirements in terms of access and parking and what other businesses or entities are nearby, and bathrooms and so on. It takes time to do this well, and we want to change our thinking around alternative sites. This is a slide that I talked with Jen about last week, and this is our aspirational slide. This is the slide that says, look, this is not just about the physical environment. The physical environment needs to be in service of the secondary instructional program generally. So we do think that facilities play an important supporting role in these areas, building relationships, setting tone and tenor of the building, inspiring creativity and innovation, technology, welcoming the community, safer and more inclusive, more flexible, energy efficient, and that really reflect the expectations of this community. I don't know that our schools necessarily as a group are on par with public facilities in this community generally. In fact, I think we might be a bit behind, and our high schools are too important, and our alternative spaces have been too long neglected to meet the standards that we're describing here. So what do we wish to do about it? We are recommending here a master study, and this recommendation is less tangible than the recommendations you just heard around elementaries and middle. But it's equally important. And the fact that we only have 3 or 4 slides on high school, do not be fooled by that. This is really important work. We believe a master study that begins in 18 is necessary at all 4 of the comprehensive high schools, coordinated, led by the instructional vision. You can see instructional spaces always lead the way. Arts, you heard plenty about that tonight. Athletics, We could tell you all about athletics at the high schools, especially relative to their athletic conferences, where it becomes very obvious. Alternative program spaces we just mentioned. Re-engagement center is on this list because we want to emphasize that there are new ideas and important ones that are emerging, and we want to pay attention to that as well. Accessibility, we're not done on accessibility. West High School's music area is not accessible, as an example. We've done a lot of great work, we're not done. HVAC and energy efficiency, logistics and support. This is a lot of work, and when we talk about doing this work, think of your instructional leadership in the district being involved in this, your student services team, your high school staff, your high school students, your high school principals, community input, athletics input, operational input, augmented by some professional services from architects, engineers. It's a big lift, but the 4 high schools are not going to get better physically without this. Things don't just happen. Things are made to happen. And this is how you make it happen. It starts here. Yeah, so that's where we want to go on the high schools. It's an ambitious project, but we think it's long overdue. Pause.
Okay.
Reaction to high schools
Yeah,
and
Anna.
alternatives?
Just I forgot what my other thought was. Just when you're doing the comprehensive plan, oh, now I remember, looking at alternative sites, can you make sure that you're also looking at Metro High School and what's going on there? Because I was in that facility and it needed quite a bit of updating.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is when we're doing the outreach and getting community voice, I think we really have to be mindful of how we're soliciting feedback. I just want to make sure that the feedback that we're getting is going to be inclusive of all of our community members, in particular our families that have children in our schools and our families of color. And so we still struggle with getting that feedback, and I just don't want to have those voices, I don't know what the word is, surpassed by people who have access to more privilege.
Sure. Quick.
TJ?
Two things. One is that I understand that there's very, very good reasons for not locating some of the alternatives in our traditional high schools. But when I look at the capacities of the unused capacity at LaFollette and East, that I would like to explore locating those that can, and if we need to have separate entrances and wall things off and do things like that for safety and other reasons. Those, you take it, the Vanderbilt projections, our own projections, those schools are under capacity for a long, long, long time. And so that's one thing I'd like to have there. And just picking up on Anna's, I understand there'll be a process to get community feedback. With the more ambitious pieces of these and the pieces around perhaps changing attendance areas and also investing, again, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in new facilities, I would like the board to consider having a community committee vet proposals, not simply just feedback sessions. James served on one of those at one point. Long time ago, when we were both younger and wiser. We're not now. I'm not young, and I think I'm getting less wise. So I'll speak for myself on that. But anyway, I think that for 2 reasons. Number one is that I think that they will give a level of attention to detail and to being in and of the community to a greater degree than the board has the capacity to do that. And number 2 is that when they make recommendations, you have a built-in set of people who will sell those recommendations if we have to go to the voters, or if we have to change boundaries and things like that. And I think both those are really key to the success. So.
Yep, thank you.
I would have to agree with TJ on moving some of the alternative programs into some of our buildings, such as LaFollette and that. My issue is twofold. One, because they're underused. Number 2, and I do not mean offense to anyone by this statement, but out of sight is out of mind. If you can't see it, you don't always see the problems that exist. And I'm really worried, looking at the data that we've seen on seclusion, restraint, and other practices. I think if it's in a more public setting, that's going to put some internal pressure on that situation, and possibly for the better.
Yep.
Quick question and then just a bigger comment. Did we take into account the possible MATC South campus into the numbers here? I mean, that's several hundred students that would be coming out of our...
Yeah, the projections do not take the 25 students into account, and that's 25 students for 2 years, and then growing to 200 after that. So
did we take the 200 into account?
We did not.
Okay.
We did not.
Next iteration, I might just do that. It's a big number that will swing. I realize we have a lot of learning to do still, but and then just a bigger comment. I mean, look, our 4 high schools exist in a competitive landscape for our community, and if you go into any of the newer high schools in our region, they are leaps and bounds in one way, shape, or form beyond where our facilities are at. Whether that's performing arts, whether that's sports, whether that's labs and scientific facilities. And so I would just push us really hard here to significantly take a step forward, even if that's one school at a time, right? And really going deep in one instead of all 4 at once. Because I want our students to have access to, 21st century arts and science and athletic facilities, and not kind of slightly better than 1960s. So, it's just I think it's a worthy investment. I mean, Mary, you mentioned doing doors. It's the single thing I heard most about at doors. I did 2,000 doors this year. A single thing I heard most about was facilities, by just regular people who had grandkids in the schools, who were parents, who were students themselves. People notice, and I think we can do a lot better. So.
Okay, we ready to move on? Sounds good. Thank you all for your work, and I'm sure we'll see more of you.
Yes, you will. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. I got a problem.
Okay.
Can we go to that last timeline slide? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because I'm worried that we're going to leave this table not actually knowing what our next step is. Yeah. I'm happy to go over it if you can't see it.
Yeah, it's on the small side even for me. So our timelines. This is a document that we prepared several months ago during our last update, just to see how these pieces would all fit in. So take the dates a little bit soft, but generally speaking, as Mike had laid out, you see our kind of data gathering and baseline building in 17. Our expansion of planning through 18, settling then in on specific projects as we approach 2020, which is the referendum date if we were to pursue big issues, big changes, big construction projects. So the other aspect of this, color coding. So sometimes the work is ours and sometimes the work's yours. So trying to get the blue triangles or the blue arrows are kind of the staff work, so building excellence team, doing the exploration in the first arrow, getting really tight on the proposals into 2018 into 19, as Mike had suggested, really knowing where you're going in 19, and then laying the foundation, coming back to the board for approval. So that's the general rhythm of it. Is there anything you wanted to add?
So immediate next step is we'll be back in April with our results of a public engagement process around the ideas you heard here, augmented by the ideas we heard here from you.
That's right. Yeah, so the idea then of putting all of these ideas in front of the board was to make sure that you're okay with us going out and engaging the community to get a better feel for where their sentiments lie. It's a bit ironic. We asked for your permission to engage the public in a public meeting.
Yeah.
That's on television. But I think we've heard enough today to
Cat's out of the bag.
To take our thoughts and combine them with yours and take them out to the community.
Yeah, and back to TJ's recommendation about having kind of this committee idea, I think that would not be what happens now, but once we kind of narrow to a more kind of tangible short list, then we would put, if the board wanted us to, we would engage a very specific committee in doing that level of work. Just to be real clear. So this is kind of actually this would be second round of engagement. Beth did the first, very high level to produce the guiding principles. Now we'll go into our first round of engagement on the tangible problems that we'd like to solve. So if you guys are okay with that, we'll come back in April with some information that'll help us narrow to a set of actual projects.
Okay.
Good? Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your attention.
And you'll stay up here, Mike, for the next bit. Okay.
Okay, so our next item is with regards to the 2018-19 budget, the compensation and staffing. This says discussion item. We talked about this last meeting. So I even talked with Mike about whether we really need to come back to it. What was the purpose? The purpose, he had said, was basically to go through and say, this is what we heard about the priorities with regards to some of the issues around staffing and compensation, so that they can have some level of comfort in understanding what the direction of the board is, the feedback. But it's going to be really short.
It is. We have a series of very short items from here on out.
Yes,
that is our hope.
Okay.
Yeah, it is aspirational. But yeah, we just wanted to, it's kind of a confirmation exercise for us as we're closing out that kind of pre-budget big ideas month of November and gearing up for the launch of the formal budget process in January. So I'll let you guys just say a few quick things. Yeah, Anna?
Can I just, what is going to be the format of the discussion? Are we going to start first on the staffing plan? Because I would, in part two, the compensation plan, I would have to remove myself from the table. So can we separate the two? Or how are you thinking of putting it forward? Just talk about how you're doing it before.
We were just going to go over the content of the memo at a very high level. And then
it was more about not getting, it wasn't actually getting into the items. We did that the last meeting. This was really about going through and saying, this is what we've heard at a high level in terms of the priorities. But Anna, at any point we can stop and say whether we feel that you need to
engage in any conversation about compensation. That might just do the trick. Yeah. Okay.
All right. I won't be engaging in any conversation around compensation.
All right. Awesome. Thank
you, Anna. TJ?
Two really quick comments. One on the on the staffing piece, and the other on the compensation.
We haven't actually gone. I think they're going to say they're going to go.
I thought we were going to go even quicker.
No, no. I think
I was trying to move forward.
I know. Thanks, TJ. Thanks. I know. We'd love to, but you know,
Okay, so we've got just a few comments. And the idea here was, the memo does almost all of our talking for us. November was what we called Big Ideas Month. We brought you a staffing and comp presentations. We want to move forward now with both staffing and compensation. We've started to engage in some advisory conversations with our employee representatives, and just want to make sure that we take this moment for a kind of a checkpoint moment to say this is where we're at with our thinking on staffing and on the comp plan. And Lisa is most familiar with the staffing, and Deirdre owns the compensation. And as you can see, there's a series of bullets that indicate how we interpreted the November conversations, and we are prepared to address any questions if you have them, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
All right. Very quickly on the staffing piece, that I think that it says here what the projections are around the workbook when we get there when the workbooks go out. to have either the projections here that 5 FTE from including the total, that what goes in the workbooks be made transparent, and how that impacts the decisions here is the first piece. And then on the compensation stuff, just picking up on something that James said last time we discussed compensation, I think that we have to be very, very careful with front-loading too much. I think that, you know, one of our issues is retention. The other is that recognizing that experience does matter to some degree. And so when it says bending the curve towards front-loading, and I know that that was among the recommendations that we had from Crofts and Justice, but I think that we need to be careful with over-bending that curve in that direction.
Okay, great. We are on to the next topic item. Okay. And this is with proposed class size policy. So just to refresh board members' understanding, we had discussed this previously. It then went to the, how do we describe the group?
We don't know.
A smaller group, a work team of Kate and TJ who did their best to come to some, to bring it forward to the board in a way that aligns with what our previous discussion had been, and also give input on some of the details of that policy. Just language-wise, if people, memories, when they come to us, if we are nitpicking every single word, it makes this a really long process. So I want to thank Kate and TJ for their time to bring this so it's more efficient when it comes to the board. Dylan?
I think that's a really fair summary of the process and how it worked. You know, the goal was to kind of capture our current practices, especially as we think of those that fall below or above, to capture that flexibility, but to be more transparent. And the other goal was to provide just that level of transparency to the process so that it doesn't come within a black box of what happens when it goes in there. And so the policy is really designed not towards 30 K-12, which is what our current policy is, but that didn't reflect our current practice, but to kind of show that graduated class size limitations based on both AGR and non-AGR, and then class size, explain that sometimes you're going to have one that comes above 30 or one that goes below 15, but own it, be aware of it, have it for sound pedagogical reasons, that it's not an accident, that we know that our building principals have made a conscious decision around that for the best interests of their school, and then create a reporting structure so that we aren't in the place where no one knows how many sections fall above that 30 or below the 15. And we really weighted both of those while the class size and often talks about at the upper end, just as we're kind of talking about small schools, small classes can really pose a press on resources. And so we wanted that reporting at both the upper and the lower. And then Kate and TJ just provided a really strong sounding board for me, so I wasn't doing the work in a black box.
Maybe just to add, that's a great summary. This is our first time experimenting with this, so I think, you know, certainly I would be open to feedback post this kind of first couple months to see how it's going.
Okay, Nikki?
My only comment, which actually I told Kate this morning at the briefing, is that the special subject 40 seems a little high even in a high school on a special class, because that's 40 kids is still 40 kids. That's my only comment.
Okay, so we're going to get into the actual detail now, right?
Yep, I'm open for feedback and comment, not combat. Nice. That was a slip there, huh?
Okay.
Lisa, can you talk a little bit about the 40? Because that's, I imagine, a PE class. I mean, I just want to make sure everyone's in alignment with what we mean by those special subject classrooms.
Yeah, it could be a singleton class, it could be a PE class, it could be something that is created that is based off a particular tweak in the schedule. When we looked at the overall class sizes at high school, there were very few of those, but they could, for certain reasons that are related to scheduling or singleton classes, get there. That would be the place where we would want to have a conversation with the principal and find out what's going on. Yeah.
But it wouldn't be like a chem lab.
Oh,
with
God.
No.
Gosh, no.
So it's reach,
I wanted to be
art,
sure of that.
music.
Yeah.
So choir may be a bigger class than an Algebra 1. And a lot of in practice, a lot of our elementary classes do that, but then they'll assign a second instructor. So
Okay.
you may be at a 50, but it's both gym teachers are in both physical education teachers are in the gymnasium at the same time because you have a single gym. That's just my experience as a Leopold parent, so I shouldn't say that's just my experience. Teacher?
I have two questions and then a couple of things other things I want to say. But the first question is the current practice on the AGR schools 18 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1? I thought it was, because that takes us, that's how we get to 21 here. And so does this reflect current practice?
I think it was flagged that I was one student too high in those.
Okay.
So that had not been flagged for me, but it was as we were doing a final run through today.
So this should read K1 AGR 20, 23, 21, 27 for 2-3. I mean 20, 27.
Wait, what? Can you say that
right
again?
Right now the chart is, it says K1 AGR 21, and my understanding is current practice is that is 20.
20, yeah, plus 1 or plus 2.
And 2-3 AGR current practice is also 20.
At AGR.
Okay, so
Yes.
Okay, good. Glad of that. I like that. The second one is that the previous policy, and there's been a couple references to it. The previous policy had a maximum course load for secondary people, and I understand there's something in the works somewhere with something related to this, and that's why it's not here. But I guess I'd like to understand better than something in the works somewhere. Something.
Yeah. So I just removed it as thinking around what our current practices were and trying to encapsulate those, and we are focused more on the sections versus the overall, and it really got really nuanced as we were talking about specials teachers who were kind of out of our prior class size. It actually says this shouldn't apply to, and so it was just trying to meet the right compromise of both current practice of who was left out. So setting the cap for the specials to be more explicit there was really the goal. So looking at each individual section is my understanding of kind of how our practice worked versus teacher load.
So, but this represents an increase in secondary teacher loads.
A potential theoretical
yeah, I mean,
increase,
okay, just to keep that in mind. Two other things that I'm not going to go into detail here, but I will probably offer amendments around one and maybe both. One is that to extend the differentiation between high poverty and low poverty beyond the AGR grades and beyond the AGR measure is something that I'm strongly considering offering an amendment at the meeting on the 18th, and I'll discuss it now if you want.
Yeah, actually, we don't want to go with policy. We don't want to go to have amendments. I mean, the idea is this is why we're working these out. This is why it comes here.
I thought we wanted to go quick tonight.
No, well, I think the issue, teacher, is when we come to policy, if we're putting amendments at the board meeting, it means the research isn't done. The staff's not coming prepared, and these are things we would look at once every 3 to 5 years, and it's not. I don't think it's the best way to do policy. So I'd rather, and if we need to, we already have discussed this. If we need to, we can bring this back. We don't have to act in December. We can bring it back and do January. That's my understanding.
And I want to be clear, that's with the caveat and the presumption that the way it's written right now, it's not intended to impact workbooks. We generally do allocations based on optimal, and so optimal is where I was trying to hit to be very precise. So it would impact if you were to say, actually, I want you to throw this whole thing out and I want you to create workbooks based on 10 and 12. That would be problematic, but that's not the feedback that I've been hearing.
So on this, I think this is important for the board. We do have to, we should discuss this. If people are in favor of what TJ is proposing, then or give an indication. No, we don't have, we don't have the majority that is going to, at this point, want to change our policy for those. But I think we should come to some type of indication for that.
I have two of those.
Is it on the process, or are we on the topic?
It's directly on the topic. I was saying that I would agree with the amendments.
Okay, let's talk about the process, and then we can go to specific.
Yeah, what is it? Let's get to the amendment,
yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. All right, just quickly, and I have two of these then. The case we made is that AGR is a historical artifact of schools that we have AGR contracts with some years ago. DPI isn't creating them anymore. It doesn't actually reflect poverty in our schools or the higher needs of our schools. And so therefore, I don't think it's the best way to allocate our resources based on that. Secondly, that I think that we do have some variety of needs and poverty levels at our middle schools that should be recognized, particularly with sixth grade things, but perhaps more broadly. That there is, that smaller class sizes, higher allocations, one way or the other, can be very beneficial, and that this distinction between our high need schools and our low need schools should not be confined to grades K through 3. That's the short case.
Okay, so what, TJ, did you have instead of AGR, was there a specific
the last year
measurement that you were proposing?
Well, last year when we did the amendment, we were using two poverty measures in the district. We're using the traditional and we're using the direct cert. Last year, I did it based on an average of the two, but I'm open to that. I wasn't prepared for something quite that detailed tonight, but that was what I arrived at last time, was that there are problems with both of those measures, and an average seemed to be kind of some place to get all the problems from both measures and all the good from both measures too. So that was what I did. It was I wasn't really in love with it, but it was the compromise I reached.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah. TJ, I know when we had this discussion in the instruction work group last time, we talked about codifying our current practice, and maybe if there was an obvious place where we wanted to tweak it to improve it, to do so. What you're proposing sounds like it might be more than that, a little more substantive, a change, and would certainly have a financial impact. Do you have the sense of what that impact would be?
I think it's actually more in the spirit of the current policy, which talks about directing resources there, and how do you define current practice? Well, current practice is as the budget was amended, and current practice that's included in current practice now. I mean, it is. The budget was amended to use that measure and to make that differentiation. Therefore, it becomes current practice. I mean, it is. So,
Basically, may I take a stab at it, explaining that a little?
Yeah, only because we haven't actually put that amendment into practice. So
I think what he's stating is that anything we do formulates the current practice. Currently, we change the situation and how we were looking at it, and therefore, anything that we use, which we created, creates the current practice and standards that we were using. That's the way I see it. Please tell me if I misunderstood.
I get that, but if I'm recalling the amendment language correctly, it was for a very specific pool of money to be used in a very specific way. So,
it was dependent on the
right, it was dependent on some conditions precedent and all of that. And so that just may be a conversation for a longer day, specificity versus the generalization. But, what I understood to be, and we talked about this, kind of to be my ambiguous marching orders from that meeting, was to kind of look at what our our general current practices and try to codify that in writing so that we don't have a simplified policy that says 30 and 50 and we put a bell curve on both ends of those are outside that policy.
I mean, we can argue about the language. We can argue about what tweak means. You know, the board is revising a policy, and I don't view this as I view this as in the spirit of the current policy. I don't view it as a huge change from the draft.
I would personally not support the amendment. I think we still have a lot of work to do around understanding what the schools really need. And when we talk about not knowing the financial impact, because that amendment was based on other specific things happening financially, the visits that I've been doing to the schools this year, the major item that the staff, because what I do is I meet with staff without the principals at the beginning of the meeting, and what I'm hearing is that what they would appreciate the most support is around mental health and behavioral issues. And so TJ, I'm not disagreeing. I believe class sizes are part of everything that we've been talking about, but I just don't want to codify it in policy without us really understanding how can we best support the challenges that teachers are facing in the classroom. And I'd rather zero in on this than that. And
two things. One, I'd be in support of the amendment. Two, in order to have the specificity, no offense, Mary, I respect our teachers, and I think we need to ask them directly, but wouldn't that cede to the fact that we should make the amendments at the major meeting, because then we'd have the time to do the research to begin with?
No, the amendments, what TJ had proposed about was not even talking about the amendments tonight and bringing them
I just want to put it out there.
Bringing them and discussing it at the board meeting. At that point, the staff doesn't have. That's why we're actually discussing it, so the staff can do the research, and we don't have an amendment that we don't actually know what the financial impact or anything else is about. So no, I think that I've heard very clearly from staff, and I think we are struggling, but I don't think necessarily could be, but I don't think it's necessarily just the class sizes. And so if you're going to spend a few $1 million more, let's make sure it's really supporting the needs of our schools. James?
Where do we work out? And we're talking about class size policy here, and this is what I tried to get at initially was, how do we work this out so that when we get to the full board meeting that we don't have to have the lengthy conversations. I mean, I can appreciate TJ's position in terms of, what he's talking about amendments here. So the process that we were trying to put in place was such that we work all these things out ahead of time so that we don't have the lengthy work at the full board meeting. So I'm questioning our process once again, because the whole idea here was so that whether it's TJ or anyone else, whatever the issue is, that it's get worked out so that we don't have these big issues. So look like we get back to the process here again. So I don't really have I don't have a problem with any board member wanting to make an amendment or what have you. The question is about the process. We were supposed to be able to work these things out like now or ahead of time so that when we get to the board members. So full board meeting, we don't have the larger issues and the long discussion. So, I mean, I can appreciate the amendment and the idea of the amendments, or anyone else having an amendment on class size. The question I have is, the process that we were supposed to put in place. And this is the issue I raised before, was that make sure, we have enough input around the table so we work these things out prior to getting to the full board meeting. So, so that's my concern, is that, is our process working?
Yeah, well,
right, that's what we're doing right. Actually, we're good. I mean, that's what we're doing now, right? And I think we actually already had this discussion on this policy, right? Then it went back to the Kate and TJ. My understanding is they couldn't wrap it up and
What if
agree,
I got a- what if I
and
have an
plus they're
issue
not
with it,
in
they have
that.
an issue with it.
Right.
I mean, what if we have issues with it too? So where do
That's what
we
we're
get
doing
our
now.
input?
Right now.
Right
Yep, this is it. Let's go.
It was also shared with the board a week ago, so you
Yeah.
could have given input to me too.
Yeah. Nikki?
I'm just asking procedural because I'm slightly confused. But I don't, board meetings are long, I get that. Voting is long, I get that. What I'm worried about is that if we do the amendments now and then limit things, are we limiting discussion at the full board meeting?
We are not.
Okay, that's
We
what I
are,
wanted
what
to
are
make
we,
sure.
what we're trying to do here is, this is all public.
No, I know.
Right, but if the first time that we talk about it is then if I have any board member has a question and says, well, I'd actually like to know the financial impact of that. Or is that actually what the administration's recommendation is? And they're like, well, this is the first time we've heard the amendment. We're really not prepared to weigh in. So that's the process. That's why I think there's a timing issue so that we have a fully vetted discussion, and it's to make sure that we are getting the type of input and analysis to do it. So yeah, the process is we try to hash these things through in the work group. If they can, anyone's free to make an amendment. It's just not the best. I don't think we're going to get the best policy.
And in fairness, this was a challenging discussion,
Yeah.
I think. I tried to represent the consensus we walked away from our last discussion with, which was codify current practice.
Yeah.
Even though TJ and I have different opinions on this, right? Which is why he's bringing up something different now, I think, which is appropriate,
Yeah,
right?
it
Because
is.
it's not,
Absolutely.
that wasn't something that would have been necessarily, just.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just real quick, I'm going back to the report that we did, and we posted an analysis of TJ's amendment on our website. So just to make sure I'm following your thinking, TJ, this potential amendment that would come to us would be making sure that your high poverty definition is what we use for K-3. Based on our analysis, there were 21 sections based on your amendment language for high poverty that currently exceed 18, maybe just by 1 or 2 though, which would be within the guidelines. So we just have to dig into this to figure out what the financial implication would be. And then, if I'm hearing you correctly, you also want to propose that we use that high poverty language for middle school?
Yes.
With the 25?
Or
well, just use the high
Some
poverty?
some differentiation. Right now, the middle
If we're
school.
gonna do our homework, I just want to make sure I know
The
what homework we're
proposal.
doing.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
The draft before we have it has grade 6, 8, maximum of 30, optimum of 25, and some differentiation at middle school. And when I said that I didn't have the amendment prepared was, number one, is I wanted to hear from our staff, I wanted to hear from the fellow board members about what that might look like. I don't think that, I don't think we'd max, I don't think I'd be proposing a max at 25 for the middle schools, but I do think that perhaps the high poverty middle schools might max at 26 or 7 or 8, those kind of numbers.
Would it be possible to hear from some of the other folks just what the appetite is to?
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Explore.
I would love to.
Anna?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So that's helpful to know what you're looking at, because before I would support or oppose any type of amendment, I would want to know what the financial impact is, the sustainability. So thanks for putting that out there. I think going back to kind of what James was speaking about is in the policy process, I think what you said, Kate, is you gave your perspective, TJ gave his perspective, but the question from the rest of the board is, how does our perspective get included in that discussion and conversation? And this is the first crack at it, so I'm sure we'll come up with ways to improve it. But I think that was maybe, and maybe I'm wrong, James, but okay. So that's just a concern that we want to make sure that if it's a work group,
work team,
that other board
I just
members-
want to kind of go back to the original purpose, which was so that I wasn't drafting in a total box to bring something that all 7 people were like, where the hell did you even come up with this? And I have processes. I bring things to senior leadership team. I vet, we take things to board officers. But the goal is not to circumvent like open meetings laws so that there is an open, full, vital conversation by the board. In case of policies too, my general practice is to send it out a week prior to the regular board packet, which we did in this case also, with the opportunity for feedback directly to me if there was a question, hey, could you vet through, see how much this cost? So, right, the goal of the work team was not to fully bake, but to provide actually more opportunity. And I'm willing to work to see how we want to work together. And I think when we do the larger suites, which is really what our policy on policies is about, is doing full entire chapters, which I don't know if you remembered when we tried to do chapter 4000, it was insurmountable. But to kind of set up, hey, this is what the policy work team is going to be looking at over the next 4 weeks, chapter 1000s. Here's what I have identified as really important, and I'm probably going to put this one on the back burner. Give me your feedback. If you think I'm missing the bus and policy 1000 is actually the most important, I don't want to come to a work group and say, oh, I didn't even look at policy 1000.
Yeah, Anna and James, this is the time.
Yeah.
This is sort of like, okay, they've looked through it, they've given input. That doesn't mean it represents our input, and this is exactly the time at which we're doing it. It just means it does get some board input prior that helps to give Dylan some direction. But then it still goes through the same process of us vetting it.
Yeah, for me, it's nice to hear it all, and then I have to go back and think about it. I just got to go back and think about it. So
about the process or about the amendment?
The information I'm hearing here tonight, I'm not going to make any kind of decisions. I typically go back and think about it for a couple of days. So that's just how it works, and then I can give some input. But you hear a lot of different opinions and input here around the table, so I'm not going to. Sometimes I will and can, but on this class size stuff, I want to think about it a little bit more.
So, excuse me, Nikki, I'm trying to make sure everyone.
Of course.
This is, Dean, can you share what you're thinking?
Oh, yeah. I'm not clear what the specific amendment is just yet, and I also don't know, there has nothing been moved, so still I hear some language. The other thing is, from what I heard is that we had like maybe 21 classes where the numbers were high.
Yeah, based on our September report on TJ's amendment in June, there were 21 K-3 classrooms that exceeded 18 based on his definition of poverty. That does not get into the +1, +2 though, TJ. And
yeah, and that doesn't. I mean, that's not exceeding the 20. Away. The 20. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
right. That was K3. Just and doesn't, so we don't know the middle school, and we need to know more now. So in those 21 cases is, I'm assuming someone, I mean, is there we could create a process where someone needs to go find out the impact of that on that class, on those specific kids, on that teachers, and maybe if is there a negative impact? Does that one extra kid or two impacting that class at that particular time? And is that something that we need to know? So I'm not quite certain if that I could see where it could, and then we want to change it. But do we know that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, TJ. I understood the amendment to be that AGR versus non-AGR is not the right slash mark. It's not the right measure of need. That
correct.
It's this differentiating this upper based on need.
And then extending whatever definition of poverty is used or need is
to
used
middle school.
To at least 6th grade and maybe to 8th. But and again, I want to hear what other people say, but until at least 6th grade and maybe to 8th. And those are the two pieces of it. And you know, I don't know if staff has a strong feeling about poverty measures other than AGR. To me, AGR, again, it's a historic artifact. It does not reflect change in conditions in our school. If we were to open a new school on Allied Drive, it would not be an AGR school. That's because there are no AGR contracts.
So here's what I'd recommend, since we still have other agenda items, is that TJ, that the amendments that you're thinking about proposing, why don't you work with the administration to define those, and the board wants to understand the financial implications and any other implications that you would have with regards to that. So then we can get the information needed for the board. I think what I'm hearing is they really want to know more about the impact before being prepared to discuss it.
Okay. And I have a second one which has no financial impact, but is there, which is that under the reporting requirement that establish that at the beginning of each semester the administration shall provide a report to the Board of Education on the number of classroom sections that fall below the established classroom minimum or exceed the established class size maximums and optimums. So to add optimums to the report.
Say that again.
Optimums what?
The optimums. At the top, there's a chart of minimums, maximums, and optimums, and to have the reporting also include the optimums. If they exceed the optimums.
For example, the way I have it written now, if we have however many K1s we have at 19, 20, and I have it at 21, is how I have it written now. So 19 and above or below 15.
Right.
Okay.
So to have the maximums, the optimums, and the minimums as part of the report, and that would be the other thing that I think that's. Otherwise, the optimums just hang out there as nothing in the policy. So to me, this puts the optimums to use.
I'll follow up with RPEO on that, just because that's who I run this.
So that's the other
by.
amendment.
Yep. Okay. Can I make one last comment on
Sure.
this? I appreciate that that the amendment is really about how we define high poverty. I totally get that, TJ, and I think depending on our analysis, we just won't know how much that swings us financially one way or another, and it may not be that big of a deal. So let us do our homework, and we'll work with you on it in the next day or so that we can have the board make an informed decision on Monday. Okay.
As always, if we believe that's the better measure, that will be incorporated in and shown as a red line, otherwise it's up for. So that is part of the process too, right? Is taking this feedback, and if it really is better, not really, you know what I mean? Incorporate it in so that it doesn't have to be by amendment, but can be worked.
Close it all the way. Open meetings.
That's right. Yeah.
It'll be over in a minute.
Right, but the term AGR is antiquated at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
So that's.
Okay. Okay, so then back to the just overall policy. Do board members have, we heard TJ's on the amendments, but we didn't talk overall on any other comments that any other board members have with regards to the policy. Yeah, Anna.
Just the numbers in the policy, if they were corrected, it sounds like that was a mistake, that they were +3.
The 21, yes.
Yeah, so I would go back and fix that.
Yes, I will.
That was my main one.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, good.
Awesome. Good work.
Okay, now I'll see you in a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
So it's either a military jet or a custodial cart going by.
Maybe a hybrid?
So apologize for that.
Okay, the next is a update from the Employee Handbook Committee, but it is also going to be a proposed action item at the December 18th regular board meeting.
Yeah, and
Maybe.
Maybe will join us.
Okay.
So we just provided you with a memo just to give you an update about where things are at and things that we've reached consensus on with the various employee work groups. And so we've reached some consensus items around benefit items, substitute teachers, and incorporating some additional language that, with regard to food service and custodians, that's already applicable to our other MTI units. We still have a lot of conversation around workday and planning time. We met again today. We did not reach consensus, but we're going to continue to meet to try and resolve some of those issues. And we have additional language, what I'm going to call general language items, that we're going to meet with the large work group tomorrow to try and resolve as well. So
the plan will be, if the groups are able to come to consensus, by Monday, then we would certainly put forward all of the handbook items for approval. If there's still some outliers and the group hasn't reached full consensus, then we would propose to hold off and bring it back to the board in January.
Okay.
Just,
Yeah,
can you
Dean?
give me an idea as to what you're still discussing? Where are the is in the area of?
I would
is there
say
still
the, around planning time.
around what?
Planning time is
I'm sorry, I didn't round what?
Planning time,
Planning
I would
time,
say is
okay.
the big, is a big issue.
Okay. Good. Yeah. All right. I understand.
Okay, thank you. We will see what comes on Monday, or not. Okay. Okay, then we are back to board policy, 8005, employment. Also a proposed action item for the December 18th meeting.
Okay, just kind of bring us all onto the same page. As you recall, Policy 8005 is a fairly lengthy policy that over the last 3 years we have waived, first as it applied to building administrators and then as it applied to administrators and to our teaching professionals. And part of the reason we had sought that waiver was just as Deirdre took on the role in the Human Resources Department, really looking at and refining the process. And the current policy is very, very prescriptive into the level of minutia and detail. And so over the past 3 years, we have developed some new hiring processes. Those are available on our website. I've previously shared some links to those. And so what I'm offering you today is a policy that serves a couple purposes. It's to streamline our existing policy, which when printed is 21 pages long. Many of these things detailed in the handbook as it exists. It's to increase transparency around certain aspects of our hiring process. So you'll see there's a more detailed description of the transaction reports, which used to be called the yellows, and those are the HR reports that come to you, as well as overall reporting around licensure. And then it is to maintain our focus on attracting diverse applicant pools to increase diversity amongst our workforce. And so to really maintain that language and where appropriate, expand that language. There was a couple-page cover memo that was included with this policy, and that really focused on the use of the equity tool. We're still getting used to the equity tool, and at January, perhaps, I think it's when we will kind of say, hey, how is the tool we proposed working or not? This equity tool was actually very helpful for me to think about the data, think about the places we have the data, and it was also just very helpful to kind of pressure testing some of my assumptions as I wrote the policy. But because of the long-term nature of the project of 8005, yeah, some of it was kind of looking back in hindsight and some of it was proactive looking. So I just did want to remind you that we are also trying out the equity tool as part of this. With that, that's all I have.
Yeah, I'm going to take us back to the last one really briefly. I apologize. The planning time comment made me recollect that we did discuss at the last operations work group, and I'm going back to the memo here, planning time is one of the elements of time being a lever for relationship building in schools. I don't see it here, and so I want to make sure it's not left off of the big movers in terms of the compensation and staffing. Big movers in the budget. So I just want to make sure that it's not on the page here, and it could be potentially a big financial driver. So just
Okay, so with regards to 8005.
I'm still not clear on how this policy works with hiring cross-categorical teachers who don't have cross-categorical qualifications, bilingual teachers who don't have bilingual qualifications. Do we advertise for minimum people who don't have education degrees and licenses?
So when we're posting we post for minimum qualifications currently. For those folks, I mean, if we cannot find an applicant pool that has qualified candidates per the DPI licensing requirements or stipulations, we can hire folks that have a bachelor's degree and have an emergency license or a license with stipulation.
And how does and where is that in this policy? Is my question.
That needs to be shifted to a preferred qualification, right? A heavily weighted preferred qualification towards licensure, but recognizing that in our hard-to-staff positions, if we cannot fill with licensed people, then minimally to have a bachelor's degree, I believe, is the first step towards applying to DPI to have a license with stipulations awarded.
And that's how we do job postings now, is minimum is having a bachelor's degree with no teaching experience, no education credits, no license.
So this
I mean, I'm
no, it would be a change.
This would be a change.
This would be a change. Okay, so that would okay, and is
codified.
Is there a way? I don't like doing job postings that say that, and I would rather have a policy that had a way for us to hire those people after we've done job postings that didn't say that. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't like advertising that we're hiring people that way. And I also think that it might create more work for your people to have to, you know, because this brings in the number of possibly minimally qualified people expands greatly. And you might end up screening more. It actually also might change our affirmative action pool numbers too. I mean, there's a lot of different implications if we do that. And I understand we have to hire these people. We have the openings. And I guess this is a solution that allows us to do that, to define that as minimally qualified. Wish there was another one.
Kind of articulating this screening into this secondary pool. So not saying you don't meet minimum qualifications, you can never have a job in MMSD, but kind of this hold pool. So that if we had to go to people who are not fully licensed.
Which is essentially what we do now. Right.
And I just want it reflected in policy. I mean, I want the policy to be accurate to the practices.
Okay.
That's.
I'll work on that language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nikki?
I had brought it up one time earlier. Again, DPI has changed the teacher license because of the state budget, how you can teach without student teaching. Again, I would love to see something in there on what our policy is. Are we seeing them as the same license? Are we seeing them as separate licenses? Are they the same kind of teacher? Because the license is the same. Are there going to be any exceptions on how we deal with that?
Anna?
Yeah, I agree with Nikki too. I was just at a meeting when they were talking about all the changes that are coming down around certification for educators, and it's really quite disturbing. So that was my question too, as a district. Like, obviously DPI is the basement, I guess, the foundation.
The floor.
And then if, as a district, can we bring it up a couple of floors? Obviously always holding to what they're requiring, but the fact that now a teacher can pay $1,500 and get a certification online. So I would prefer to have a higher standard.
And I guess just what I want to clarify, James, sorry for interrupting, is that this standard be reflected in policy or in process?
In both.
Just since you both brought it up, I was just kind of turning and looking at both.
For me, it'd be in both. I don't speak for Anna. So.
Oh, thank you.
James?
Yeah, could someone help me understand what on the job posting, what A4 actually means? How the review date supports a good faith effort to reach a diversified pool of candidates? How does that actually work, the review date?
Yeah, so that we're not saying, oh, you have 48 hours to apply for it. So if you didn't hear if we didn't hear from you within 40, so it's just making sure we're not creating hurdles like unrealistic timelines, or that we're closing it in 2 weeks and we're not reviewing it for a month. So because we're losing candidates by not moving in a timely process. So just making sure that timelines of process are not either barriers to being aware of the position and applying, or hurdles because you're not having responsive timelines. Which was trying to address two of the concerns I heard in conversations, is making sure everybody gets replied to in a timely way,
so
right?
Where do you address, and this is hiring policy, how do you get at making sure your pool is diversified? Where do you get at that?
So that language is about looking to see if the pool, so we have the affirmative action where it says to look to see if it reflects the availability.
It's in that second part.
It's in part of the top of page 2. It says we'll review the applications to determine whether they're generally representative of the relevant labor market availability set forth in the AA plan. If the review does not reflect such availability, the hiring authority will extend the posting period and broaden its recruitment efforts unless the AA officer indicates a good faith effort has been made. So if we say it's been a nationwide that's been open for a month and we've done X, Y, and Z, there may not be a broader period, but generally we want to look that the applicant pool reflects minimally the availability within the workforce, and then consider that before we go to reviewing on the merits.
Use of community panels. If the panel's not going to make a recommendation, what's the point of these community panels if they're not going to make a recommendation? And how do you, I know you'd say it's comprised of staff members, parents, community members, and at the high school level students. But they're not going. What's the point of the community panel if they're not going to make a recommendation? And why have a community panel?
I can comment on that only because I experienced the feedback from the community panels. We use it for all of our principal hiring. There's a community panel that gets assembled. I receive all of the written notes on any candidate. The 2 or 3 principal finalists come to me. Those notes contain a lot of detail about what the community panel liked about the candidate, any concerns, questions, and then additional feedback.
So are these community panels, are they specialists? I mean, it makes sense to me, for example, if you've got some highly technical field or something, you're hiring someone and you have some community panel of experts to really evaluate a person's skill set or something, but to just have a panel of people to talk about.
Like I said, we've used it for principal hiring, and yeah, I mean, I'll just say that while there is HR expertise there to support and prepare and support the community panel throughout the process, it's that final phase. Everybody, at least in the principal hiring process, wouldn't be there if they didn't have the core competencies to be a principal in our district. They would have been screened out through all the other various activities. This is like the last stop, and it's very much about, I guess fit may be the right term, like the kind of cultural fit for the school. And so it's good information for me to get that kind of feedback about an actual school community's take on the candidate before I make that final decision.
I just want to jump in really quick. So part of the process is sending out a leadership survey to the school community. And so it's sent out to all the parents. So there's a lot of feedback that comes back from that school community leadership survey that informs the school-based leadership team, and they make decisions on who they think should be on that community panel. So community members and parents, the school-based leadership team. So they will make decisions about community leaders, parents, and so if there are specific things that they're looking for as a school community, they will use that leadership survey to kind of drive the folks that they want on that community panel. So you may have somebody that has, special ed experience, budgeting and finance experience, a community neighborhood experience, et cetera. So there has been a great deal of value, I think, in the community panel, and they do provide the superintendent with a lot of good information.
Yeah, and if they were to provide me with a recommendation, again, this is very specific to a principal hiring, which is of great interest to many people in our school district, then if I disagreed with the panel, right, that would create a kind of tension that I think is actually unnecessary.
That's unnecessary?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I need to be able to make the final decision, and so we've been pretty clear, and it hasn't been an issue. I think the community panels have appreciated the opportunity for serious input, and I've taken it.
And they've been representative of our community demographics, typically?
Yes. Yep.
I just meant, okay. Yep, good.
Yeah, so my comment around the community panels, having a little bit of experience, one thing that I would like to see in this policy, that I have heard about community leaders that are sitting on these panels, but they're not actually residing in our community. And so I don't think that if you're going to be a community, I just feel like you should be connected to the community, in particular the school community, because you could pull someone from the west side of Madison and then stick them on the north side community panel, and they might not be very connected to that community, even if they belong to a certain organization or something like that. So I just think being really intentional about making sure community leaders are actually connected to that school community.
Anna, so what about I think it's a great point, but I'm thinking about the situation, if that's are you saying, should it be a requirement, consideration? Let me give you an example, is that where there is a specific type of expertise, and maybe if you're looking for people from that particular community, school community, you won't find someone with that. They may be part of the overall Madison community, but because you have other people on that committee who are part of that school's community, you're still getting that strong voice. So I'm just wondering if you're saying it's a suggestion that a person on that committee has to be from that school community.
I think there should be priority put upon drawing community leaders from that community on those committees. So,
yes.
You know, whatever the neighborhood you're looking at, and not necessarily looking to bigger nonprofits, more organized organization to be identified as community leaders, but actually looking at who are the community leaders within that community and having their voice represented on those committees.
And I totally support that position.
Yeah, I do too.
There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, we've seen hiring, well, I think it's important to draw from communities and the immediate community, whether it be east side, north side, west side. I think that there's knowledge there that just simply from that community that others don't have.
I support it as well. I just want a clarification whether it was a requirement and whether it held true regardless of what type of expertise. But I like the way Anna said, and I certainly support that. Nikki and then Dean.
I like the majority of the policy. I just have one question, which is on letter E, on the unilateral emergency hires of superintendent may unilaterally place an interim lead principal. And I understand the need for that, but is there a way for the board to ever have a heads up on that or notice, or is it, I understand the unilateral part at the same point.
I always give you guys a heads up. That is generally my practice. I would never appoint an interim principal without giving the board a heads up. I mean, I always do. And it is my role as a superintendent.
And it's still within the transaction report expectation that like all hires still ultimately go through the transaction report. And one of the key changes we're making to the transaction report, which might be missed a little bit, is to be more timely, right? Because by marking that licensure as pending, we're not waiting for DPI to confirm. So you're not getting a December report with a September hire because now we've verified. We'll just mark. So I think that timing actually adds the transparency to that too.
Agreed. Okay, that's all I needed clarification.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Dean was next.
Yeah, two points. One, the community members, there are citywide community leaders or members that have impact throughout and very deep connections in many communities, not just one. So there's, your point is well taken, that want to hit around the local school, but there are people that have impact, that are deeply involved in many communities, and so it shouldn't be restrictive, but we should really focus on people right there. I was also curious about TJ's comment earlier about, do we have problems other than in bilingual and cross-categorical applicants applying who aren't fully qualified, or is it mainly centered on those two areas?
Yeah, we don't have any challenges in our regular ed pools of finding qualified candidates.
Yeah,
it,
so
it is
really
typically the high need, hard to fill areas that are our pain points.
Like we've known, and so the policy is good. We really want to try to attract qualified candidates and fully certified and experienced people, if possible, particularly to the tougher ones.
We do.
But I think some way where you add a little clause in there and said, when unable to find qualified, then we can kick in add some other criteria. It really shouldn't be too difficult to do that, but obviously the emphasis is finding fully certified, qualified people to apply for all of our staff. We get that, but it's mainly those two areas and there are other strategies that we've talked about that you're using to try to encourage that, and we should maybe figure out ways to increase those strategies or enhance them somehow.
Okay, teacher.
Two things. One is, what about music teachers? Don't we have a little problem there too? Yeah, just check. The other thing is,
Not the volume of challenge.
yeah, not a big deal on that. On the superintendent's prerogative around the interims, I guess, do we want to extend this to past principals, retired principals, or principals who are now in other positions? Because I think that, you know, that kind of, I mean, that expands the pool a little bit, and also, so that's piece number one. And piece number two is, I think one of the interims appointed last year was a dean of students, not an assistant principal.
Screened through the assistant, they had screened through, and there was, at that point, and he was a 50-50, so he was part-time AP, part-time dean.
So he would have.
If we're thinking of the one I'm thinking,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
getting into too much detail,
and I don't want to open wounds. So,
right. But it's right. So it's.
So he would have fit under this policy.
Yes.
Okay, that was my.
Yes.
That was my question.
And thank you for the catch on past principals.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, Kate.
I just, maybe in the spirit of transparency, the kind of three pieces of feedback that I offered through the process. One was around making sure that we had visibility into teachers and staff on one-year licenses, right? So trying to solve the emergency license challenge, which isn't really possible to solve via policy, but at least have visibility. Two was around diversity of our hiring pool, and then three was just around timeliness of the process. So those are just the three pieces that, just so in the spirit of transparency.
Timeliness.
Timeliness.
Which seemed consistent with things I've been hearing over the last 3 years, and were things I really tried to incorporate.
Yep. Okay, so Dylan, do you feel you have what you need?
I do, and even though we're on the tight turnaround, I think this all makes a lot of sense. I'm still feeling very confident for Monday work group, but our Monday regular meeting, but again, I'm open to conversation there too.
Okay, great. Is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion for adjournment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
It passes.